triangle ABC is a right triangle, and angle ACB is 30 degrees. What is the measure of angle BAC? Well, the first thing I want to do is fill in this information, that angle ACB is 30. ACB is this angle right here, and it's 30 degrees. So I know 2 out of the 3 angles of my triangle. And I know that the 3 angles of a triangle add to be 180. So that means that this 90-degree angle plus this 30-degree angle plus the measure of angle BAC right here equals 180. The first thing I need to do is combine like terms. 90 plus 30 is 120, plus the measure of angle BAC is 180 degrees. To solve for the measure of angle BAC, we need to subtract 120 from both sides. 120 minus 120 is 0. Bring down the measure of angle BAC equals 180 minus 120 is 60. So that means the measure of angle BAC is 60 degrees. In the figure, A, B, and C are points on the number line, where O is the origin. What is the ratio of the distance BC to the distance AB? So first we need to find the distance between points B and C. And the distance between 2 points is the absolute value of the difference of the coordinates. So that is the absolute value of B is 5 minus C is 8, which is the absolute value of -3, and that is 3. So the distance between points B and C is 3. Now we're going to do the same thing to find the distance between points A and B. And again, it's the absolute value of the difference of the coordinates of point A and point B. So that's the absolute value of A is -6 minus B is 5, which is the absolute value of -6 minus 5 is -11, and that is 11. So the distance from point A to point B is 11. Now they've asked us what the ratio of those distances is. And it gives you the order that it wants the ratio written in. So the distance BC should be the first number in the ratio, 3, 2, and we use a colon, or you can write 2, is fine too. The distance from points A to B, which is 11. So our ratio is 3 to 11, or answer D. Jamie had $6.50 in his wallet when he left home. He spent $4.25 on drinks and $2 on a magazine. Later, his friend repaid him $2.50 that he had borrowed the previous day. How much money does Jamie have in his wallet? So the first thing I'd like to do is find the total amount of money that Jamie spent. And I see that he spent $4.25 and $2. So to find the total amount of money he spent, I need to add $4.25 plus $2. And it's very important that whenever you add numbers with decimals or subtract numbers with decimals, that you line up the decimals. So now I'm ready to add, and I can just bring my decimal down before I even start. 5 plus 0 is 5, 2 plus 0 is 2, 4 plus 2 is 6. So now I know he spent a total of $6.25. And if he spent that much money, then that's money that is taken away from what he had. So he started with $6.50, but he spent $6.25. So I have to subtract what he spent from what he had before. And again, we need to line up our decimals. I can't take 5 from 0, so I'm going to borrow from this 5. It becomes a 4. And now I have 10 minus 5 is 5. And 4 minus 2 is 2. Can bring down that decimal. 6 minus 6 is 0. So that means after he spent the $4.25 on the drinks and $2 on the magazine, he only had 25 cents left. But his friend repaid him $2.50, which means his friend gave him $2.50. So that's money that's added to his total. So now I'm going to take what he had after he spent his money and add the money his friend gave him. And again, we line up our decimals. 5 plus 0 is 5. 2 plus 5 is 7. Bring down the decimal. 0 plus 2 is 2. So after spending money and getting repaid money, he now has a total of $2.75, which is answer D. What is the area of the figure shown? Well, there are a few different ways you could approach this problem, but I'm going to show you one. And that is to first find the area of this whole rectangle, and then simply to subtract the area of this rectangle here, since that's the only part that's missing out of this large rectangle. So first, we'll find the area of the large rectangle. And the area of a rectangle is the length times the width. So the area of the large rectangle is 20 feet times 50 feet. So the area is 2 times 5 is 10, 0, 0. 1,000 feet times feet, feet squared. So the area of the large rectangle is 1,000 feet squared. Now we need to find the area of this smaller rectangle, the only part that's missing out of our large rectangle. So I'm going to label this. This is the area of the large rectangle. Now we're going to find the area of the small rectangle. So again, area is the length times the width. And we have the length and the width for our small rectangle as well. 15 feet and 6 feet. So the area is 15 feet times 6 feet. 6 times 10 is 60. 6 times 5 is 30. So 30 plus 60 is 90. Feet times feet is feet squared. So the area of this little rectangle is 90 feet squared. So to find the area of this figure, we have to subtract the area of our large rectangle, 1,000 feet squared, minus the area of that small rectangle cutout, which is 90 feet squared. And 1,000 minus 90 is 910 feet squared. And that's the area of our figure. A tire on a car rotates 500 RPM, or revolutions per minute, when the car is traveling at 50 kilometers per hour. What is the circumference of the tire in meters? Well, the first thing I want to do is take this 50 kilometers per hour and convert it into meters, since that's what they want the circumference in. So to convert kilometers to meters, I multiply it by the conversion factor of 1,000 meters is 1 kilometer. And when I multiply these fractions, I can cross-cancel these units, kilometers, and I'll be left with meters per hour. And I'll go ahead and do that first. So our kilometers cross-cancel. 50 times 1,000 is 50,000 meters per 1 hour. So every hour, this car goes 50,000 meters. And we know that it goes 500 revolutions every minute. So then I want to convert my 50,000 meters per hour into meters per minute so I can more easily compare it to my revolutions per minute. So I'll multiply it by the conversion factor of 1 hour is 60 minutes. So again, my hours cross-cancel since I'm multiplying fractions, and I get 50,000 meters every 60 minutes. What I want to find, though, is what 1 revolution is. How many meters is 1 revolution? Because 1 revolution is 1 time all the way around the tire. And that would be the circumference, which is what they're asking me for. So I'm going to take this 50,000 meters per 60 minutes and multiply it times my 500 revolutions per minute. So every 1 minute, the car goes 500 revolutions. So that again, my minutes, these units, minutes cross-cancel. And I can cross-cancel my 50,000 and my 500 by dividing them both by 500. And 500 divided by 500 is 1. And 50,000 divided by 500 is 100. So then 100 meters times 1 is 100 meters divided by 60 revolutions. So now I found that every 100 meters, this car, it's going 60 revolutions every 100 meters, which I can then simplify by canceling out the zeros, and I get 10/6 meters per revolution. So it goes 10/6 of a meter every revolution. And again, a revolution is 1 time all the way around the wheel, which is the circumference. So our circumference is 10/6. Kyle bats third in the batting order for the Badgers baseball team. The table shows the number of hits that Kyle had in each of 7 consecutive games played during 1 week in July. What is the mean of the numbers in the distribution shown in the table? Well, the mean of a set of numbers is the average. And to find the average or the mean, you must add all of the numbers together and then divide them by the number of numbers there are. So first we'll add all the numbers together. 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 1 plus 1 plus 4 plus 2. Then we divide by the number of numbers there are, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we divide by 7. And again, this is how we find the mean. Add the numbers together and then divide by the number of numbers there are. So that is 1 plus 2 is 3, 3 plus 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7, plus 1 is 8, plus 4 is 12, plus 2 is 14. So 14 divided by 7. And 14 divided by 7 is 2. Therefore, the mean, or the average, of these numbers is 2. If A equals -6 and B equals 7, then 4A times the quantity 3B plus 5 plus 2B equals, if we want to find the value of this expression, then the first thing we need to do is substitute -6 and 7 for A and B respectively. So 4, this is actually 4 times A. Anytime you see a number and a letter written next to each other like this, that's multiplication. So I know that when I replace A with a -6, it's going to read 4 times -6. And you can use a little dot for a time sign, or you can even use the X for the time sign. But I'm just going to use parentheses. And then these parentheses here, since there's no sign between the A and the parentheses, not a plus sign, not a minus sign, or a division sign, again, it's understood to be multiplication. So this is times the quantity, 3, again, times B. B is 7, plus 5, plus 2, again, times B, which is 7. Now there are a lot of parentheses here. So what we can do to kind of minimize confusion is we can change these parentheses into brackets. And it still means the same thing. They act exactly like parentheses do. But sometimes it makes it look a little less confusing if you don't have all those parentheses everywhere. So in order to simplify this expression, we have to follow the order of operations, sometimes referred to as PEMDAS. I'm going to write that over here just so we have it to refer to, which is that we first always must simplify inside our parentheses first. Then we would simplify any terms with exponents next, followed by simplifying our multiplication and division operations from left to right in our expression. So just whichever one occurs first in our expression from left to right. And finally, we would simplify our addition and subtraction operations, also from left to right. So following PEMDAS, we first need to simplify these expressions inside our grouping symbols. So I'll bring down my 4 times -6, and then inside my grouping symbols, I also have to follow the order of operations. So now looking inside these grouping symbols, I have 2 different operations. I have multiplication, 3 times 7, and addition, plus 5. So if we refer back to PEMDAS, we need to do our multiplication before we do our addition. So I'm going to start by multiplying 3 times 7, which is 21. And I'll bring down plus 5, plus 2, times 7. We haven't finished simplifying inside our parentheses, or grouping symbols. So we must continue simplifying inside our grouping symbols until we're done. So that means the next thing I'm going to do is simplify 21 plus 5. So I have 4 times negative 6 times the quantity 26. And I can now just use parentheses again because I'm just multiplying times another number, plus 2 times 7. So we finished with the parentheses, which really, I know it looks like we haven't, but what this parentheses, what that P actually means, is not just parentheses. Any parentheses you do, simplify them. No. Doesn't mean that. It means any parentheses that act as grouping symbols. So parentheses that group more than one term together. And if you'll look at our parentheses, none of the ones we have up here are grouping more than one term together. Each set of parentheses just has a term in it because it's really acting as a multiplication sign, not as a grouping symbol in this case. So the only operations we have left are multiplication, 4 times negative 6 times 26, and addition. And again, according to PEMDAS, we need to do that multiplication before we get to addition. And we work multiplication division simply from left to right. So I'll first multiply 4 times negative 6, which is negative 24. Positive times a negative is a negative, times 26 plus 2 times 7. So we want to continue working our multiplication from left to right until we've simplified all multiplication, which means I need to multiply negative 24 times 26 next. And I'm going to do that just right here to the side. 26 times 24. 4 times 6 is 24. So you write the 4 and carry the 2. 4 times 2 is 8, plus 2 is 10. And then we use a 0 placeholder so we can move on to the 2. 2 times 6 is 12, write the 2, carry the 1. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5. 4 plus 0 is 4, 0 plus 2 is 2, 1 plus 5 is 6. 624, and that's after we added. But it was a positive 26 times a negative 24, which means it's a negative 624 plus 2 times 7. We're almost there. We need to continue with our multiplication until we've multiplied all the terms there are to multiply, which means we next need to multiply our 2 times 7. So we have negative 624 plus 2 times 7 is 14. Now we finally simplified it down to our very last operation, and that is addition. And we're adding 2 numbers with different signs. One's negative, one's positive. When you're adding numbers with different signs, you need to subtract the numbers and take the sign of the number with the larger absolute value. So 624 minus 14 is 610. And since 624 is negative, our answer is negative. So your answer is D, negative 610. The Charleston Recycling Company collects 50,000 tons of recyclable material every month. The chart shows the kinds of materials that are collected by the company's 5 trucks. What is the second most common material that is recycled? This is a pie chart, And a pie chart is a visual representation of data. The data represented in the chart will add up to a total of 100%. 40% plus 25% plus 15% plus 5% plus 15% is a total of 100%. The larger the slice, the larger the percent. And the larger the slice and percent means the more common that piece of data is, or the more times that data occurs. So in this case, they're asking what the second most common material is. And we can see that paper is the most commonly recycled material. It has the largest slice of the pie, and thus the largest percentage. So the second most common recycled would be glass at 25%. B. The distance traveled by a moving object is computed from the relation distance equals rate times time, where r is the rate of travel, speed, and t is the time of travel. A Major League pitcher throws a fastball at a speed of 125 feet per second. The distance from the pitching rubber to home plate is 60 5/10 feet. How long, in seconds, does it take a fastball to travel this distance? Compute your answer to the nearest hundredth of a second. So first I'm going to pull out this formula. That's going to be very helpful in solving this problem. Distance equals the rate times the time. Now I want to take the information I was given and substitute it into this equation. So they told me the speed of the ball. And remember, speed is your rate, r. So that means I'm going to replace r with 125. Then they also gave me the distance, 60 5/10 feet, which means I'm going to replace d with distance, 60 5/10. And so t is what I'm trying to find. So the t will stay there in my equation. So in order to find t, to find time, we need to solve for t by dividing both sides by 125. 125 divided by 125 is 1, times t is t. So to find our answer, we need to divide 60 5/10 by 125. So I'll work it over here. 60 5/10 divided by 125. So that decimal goes right there. 125 does not go into 60, but it does go into 605. So you've got 125, 250, 500, and then one more time would be 625, so that means it only goes 4 times. And that is 500. We subtract, and we get 105. Add another 0, bring it down. We want to see how many times 125 goes into 1,050. Well, if you'll remember that 125 times 4 was 500, then it would go twice as many times as that, so 8 times. And that would give us 1,000. We subtract that and we get 50. Add another 0, bring it down. And 125 goes into 500 4 times. 125 times 4 is 500. Subtract and you get 0. So that means that the time would be 484 thousandths seconds. But if we go back to our instructions, it said to compute your answer to the nearest hundredth, which means I need to round this to the hundredths place. The 8 is in the hundredths place, and that 4 tells the 8 to stay the same. So it's simply 48 hundredths seconds. Kyle bats third in the batting order for the Badgers baseball team. The table shows the number of hits that Kyle had in each of 7 consecutive games played during 1 week in July. What is the mode of the numbers shown in the table? Mode means the number that occurs the most. So out of these numbers, 1 occurs 1, 2, 3 times. 2 occurs twice. 3 occurs once, and 4 occurs once. So the number that occurs the most, or the mode, is the number 1. Mrs. Patterson's classroom has 16 empty chairs. All the chairs are occupied when every student is present. If 2/5 of the students are absent, how many students make up her entire class? This is a great problem to use a proportion to solve. We can take this fraction, 2/5, and use that as our first ratio. 2 being the amount of students who are absent out of the 5 total. And that equals, again, number of students who are absent divided by the total. And it says in the problem that there are 16 empty chairs, which means there are 16 students missing, since usually all the chairs are occupied when every student is present. So every empty chair is a student who's absent. So we have 16 absent students out of, and this is what we don't know. What's the total? How many students make up her entire class? And to solve a proportion, we simply need to cross multiply. 2 times x is 2x, and that equals 16 times 5, which is 80. And then we solve for x by dividing both sides by 2. And x equals 40. So that means there are 40 students in her entire class. Dorothy is half her sister's age. She will be 3/4 of her sister's age in 20 years. How many years old is she? We have 2 unknowns here. We don't know Dorothy's age, and we don't know her sister's age. So I'm going to make up 2 variables for those. I'm going to use D for Dorothy's current age. And I'll use S for the sister's current age. And I say current because they're talking about their ages now, and then also their ages in 20 years. But what we want to know is how many years old she is now. So we're going to deal with their current ages. So first we have that Dorothy is, and is in math means equals. It's one of my favorite words. I love the equal sign. So Dorothy equals half her sister's age, so half S. So it's kind of like translating. You're translating from words into mathematical equations. The next sentence says she will be, so Dorothy, will be 3/4 of her sister's age in 20 years. So Dorothy in 20 years will be 3/4 of her sister's age in 20 years. Remember that D and S were Dorothy and her sister's current ages. So when they talk about in 20 years, that means we have to add 20 to their current age. So Dorothy's age in 20 years, so plus 20, will be, or equals, 3/4 of her sister's age, also in 20 years. So we want to solve for Dorothy's age, obviously, and we can do this in lots of different ways. But the first thing I notice is that since I know that D is 1/2 S, I can replace D in this equation with 1/2 S, and that's called substitution. So that's the method I'm going to use. I'm going to replace D with 1/2 S plus 20 equals 3/4 times the quantity S plus 20. Well, from here we have lots of options for solving. And the first thing I think about is, really I just want to get rid of this fraction, this 3/4. So I think I'll start by distributing the 3/4 to what's inside my parentheses. So I have 1/2 S plus 20 is equal to 3/4 S plus, and then with the 3/4 and the 20, I can put 20 over 1, and I can simplify multiplying these numbers by cross-canceling 4 and 20. I'm simply multiplying two fractions together, so I can use this shortcut. I'm going to divide both 4 and 20 by 4. 4 divided by 4 is 1, and 20 divided by 4 is 5. So 3 times 5 is 15. 3/4 of 20 is 15. That makes sense. Okay, so we need to get all of our variables on the same side. So to do that, I'm going to subtract 1/2 S from both sides. 1/2 S minus 1/2 S is 0. I'm going to bring down 20, and that equals. Now, to subtract fractions, I have to have common denominators. So 1/2 is also 2/4. So I'm going to change 1/2 to 2/4 so that I can subtract these. And then when I subtract, you just subtract the numerators. 3 minus 2 is 1, and your denominators stay the same, 1/4 S, plus 15. Next, I need to subtract 15 from both sides. 20 minus 15 is 5, and 5 is 1/4 of the sister's age. So finally, I need to multiply both sides by the multiplicative inverse of 1/4, which is 4 over 1, or just 4. So multiply both sides by 4. 4 times 5 is 20, and 20 is her sister's age. 1/4 of 4 is 1. So we're left with S, the sister's age. Well, remember that Dorothy is half of her sister's age. So since we now know her sister's age is 20, we know that Dorothy is half of that, and half of 20 is 10. So that means Dorothy is 10 years old. You could have solved this also by just kind of playing with the numbers, playing with the answers, and seeing which ones would work with the information you were given. But I always love to solve a good algebra problem. Which of the following expressions represents the ratio of the area of a circle to its circumference? We've got some pretty key words here. The first one I see is ratio. A ratio is a comparison of two numbers, like a fraction. And what we're comparing is the area of a circle to its circumference. Well, the area of a circle is pi times radius squared, while the circumference of a circle is 2 times pi times radius. So the area is going to be our numerator. Since it was listed first, area to circumference means that the area should be in the numerator, divided by, this 2 is your division bar, the circumference, 2 times pi times radius. And then we need to simplify. First, I see that pi divided by pi cancels. Pi divided by pi is 1. Anything divided by itself is 1. So we can cancel it. And then I can simplify r squared divided by r. When you divide, you subtract the exponents. Or another way to think about it is r squared is r times r. And I'm dividing that by r. So again, you have something divided by itself is 1, or it cancels. So I'm left with just r in the numerator divided by 2 in the denominator, since those r's canceled. So we just have r divided by 2, which is answer E. The figure shows an irregular quadrilateral and the lengths of its individual sides. Which of the following equations best represents the perimeter of the quadrilateral? The perimeter is the distance around a figure. To find the perimeter of any shape, you can simply add all of the sides. So the perimeter is m plus 3 plus m plus 2 plus m plus 2m. And now we just need to combine like terms. So the perimeter is m plus m plus m plus 2m. So that's 1, 2, 3 m's plus 2 m's is a total of 5 m's. Plus 3 plus 2 is 5. So the perimeter is 5m plus 5. Answer D. In the figure, segment BC is 4 units long, segment CD is 8 units long, and segment DE is 6 units long. What is the length of segment AC? The first thing I'd like to do is take this information and actually put it on my picture. So segment BC is 4 units long. Here's segment BC, it's 4. Segment CD is 8 units long. CD is 8. And segment DE is 6 units long. DE is 6 units long. These triangles are not congruent, and that's obvious. If you're looking at them, you can see this triangle is smaller than the other one. However, these right angles are congruent. These vertical angles are congruent. And since 2 angles of this triangle are congruent to 2 angles of the other triangle, that means that the third angles, angle E and angle A, are congruent to each other. Therefore, these 2 triangles are similar to each other because all 3 of their corresponding angles are congruent to each other. And since these triangles are similar, that means that their corresponding sides are proportional. You see that segment BC is half of segment CD. 4 is half of 8. So if we can find the length of segment CE, then we know the length of segment AC is half of that. we're going to find the length of segment CE using the Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. We have our two legs. 8 squared plus 6 squared equals C squared. 8 squared is 64, plus 6 squared is 36, equals C squared. 64 plus 36 is 100, equals C squared. Then to solve for C, we need to square root both sides. The square root of 100 is 10, and the square root of C squared is C. So the length of segment CE is 10. And again, the lengths of the sides of triangle ABC are half the corresponding sides of triangle CDE. So since the length of segment CE is 10, that means that the length of segment AC is half of that, or 5. So answer B. The Charleston Recycling Company collects 50,000 tons of recyclable material every month. The chart shows the kinds of materials that are collected by the company's 5 trucks. Approximately how much paper is recycled every month? This pie chart is a total of 100%. And it's a total 100% of 50,000 tons. So this 40% means 40% of the total. Paper is 40%, so 40% of the total amount of recyclable material collected, or 50,000 tons, 40% of that is paper. And that's what we want to find, is how much is that? Well, of means to multiply. And I'm going to multiply 40% and 50,000, which means I need to change 40% to a decimal. So move the decimal 2 places to the left. So I'm actually multiplying 4/10, or 40 hundredths, it's the same thing, times 50,000. So we have 50,000 times 4/10. 4 times 0 is 0, 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 and 4 times 5 is 20. We have one number behind the decimal, so our answer should have one number behind the decimal, and we get 20,000 tons. So 20,000 tons of the total 50,000 tons of recyclable material is paper. Figure 9 shows 2 quarter circles centered on the origin of the Cartesian coordinate plane. The inner circle has a radius of 2 units. The outer circle has a radius of 3 units. What is the area of the shaded region? So that's right in here. And so if you can just imagine it, this circle would continue going, as would this larger circle. So since it's been split into quarters, all we're finding the area of is a quarter of those circles. So first let's start with what the formula for the area of a circle is. It's pi times radius squared. As we discussed though, this is only a quarter of these circles, so our area is a quarter of the area of these circles. So, and then we need to find the area of just the part between those 2 circles. So that would be the area of the large circle minus the area of the small circle. And the area of the large circle would be pi times the radius, which is 3 squared, minus the area of the small circle, which would be pi times 2 squared. And the 3 and the 2 came from the radius. The radius of the small circle is 2, and the radius of the outer circle has a radius of 3. So that's where these numbers came from. And now let's simplify that. So we get area is 1/4 of 3 squared is 9, so 9 pi, minus 2 squared is 4, so 4 pi. Now since each one of these terms has a pi in it, we can factor the pi out. So we get area equals 1/4 pi times the quantity 9 minus 4. And then we can simplify 9 minus 4, so we have area equals 1/4 pi times 5. And 1/4 times 5 is 5/4, so that's 5/4 pi. But of course, if you're needing to bubble this in on an answer sheet, then you don't have the option of bubbling pi. So we're going to have to multiply 5/4 times pi. And 5/4 times pi is 1 25/100 pi. And for pi, we'll just use 3 1400. So we're doing 1 25/100 times 3 1400. And that I'm going to do over here. So 3 1400 times 1 25/100. And that's my pi. 5 times 4 is 20. 5 times 1 is 5, that's 7. 5 times 3 is 15. Put a 0 placeholder. 2 times 4 is 8. 2 times 1 is 2. 2 times 3 is 6. Put 2 0 placeholders. 1 times 4 is 4. 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times 3 is 3. Add that together. That's 0. 7 plus 8 is 15, carry the 1. 5, 9, 10, 12, carry the 1. 6, 7, 8, 9, 3. And then we have 4 numbers behind the decimal. 1, 2, 3, 4 numbers behind the decimal. So, and then we could round this to 3 93/100 would be the area of just the shaded region. Which of the following expressions is equivalent to the quantity A plus B times the quantity A minus B? Well, this is actually a rule that you would memorize, but you don't have to memorize it. You can always just take these binomials and multiply them together using FOIL. The F stands for first, meaning to multiply the first terms in each set of parentheses. So A times A. And A times A is A squared. Then O stands for outer or outside. So you multiply the two terms on the outsides, or A and negative B. So A times negative B is negative AB. I stands for inner or inside. So you multiply the two terms on the inside, B and A. B times A is BA or AB. So plus AB. And finally, the L stands for last. So you multiply the two terms that are in the last positions of each set of parentheses. Positive B times negative B, which is negative B squared. Then to simplify, we combine like terms. Negative AB and positive AB are like terms, and they cancel each other out because they're additive inverses of each other, or opposites. So we're left with A squared minus B squared, or answer A. If 12 divided by x is equal to 30 divided by 6, what is the value of x? This is a proportion. A proportion is a ratio set equal to a ratio. And a ratio is simply the comparison of two numbers, or a fraction. And proportions are pretty cool because their cross products are equal to each other. That means that 12 times 6 is equal to x times 30, which we could simplify to say 72 is equal to 30x. And then we can solve for x by dividing both sides by 30. So 72 divided by 30. 30 goes into 72 two times, which gives us 60. We subtract and we get 12. So we add a decimal and a 0 and bring down the 0. And 30 goes into 120 four times. 30 times 4 is 120. We subtract and get 0. So that means that 2 4/10 is equal to x, which is answer B. Morris started work today at 7 a.m. and worked until 4:30 p.m. He earns $12 per hour for his regular shift, which is 8 hours, and 50% more per hour for overtime. How much did Morris make today? The first thing we want to do is find out how long Morris worked. So if he worked from 7 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., then from 7 a.m. to noon, that's 5 hours. And from noon to 4:30 p.m. is 4.5 hours, which means he made he worked for a total of 9.5 hours. Now they told us that he makes $12 an hour for just his regular 8-hour shift. So for 8 of these hours, he made $12 an hour. And the rest, the leftover, so 1.5 hours, would be his overtime. And for overtime, he makes 50% more per hour. So his regular pay would be 8 hours times $12 an hour, which is $96. But then for overtime, he makes 1.5 times as much as he made for his regular shift. So 12 times 50% more, which would be 1.5, times he worked that for 1.5 hours. So first I'm going to multiply 12 times 1.5. 5 times 2 is 10, carry the 1. 5 times 1 is 5, plus 1 is 6. Put a 0 placeholder. 1 times 2 is 2. 1 times 1 is 1. So we add this together and we get 180, but there's one number behind the decimal. So that means that he was making $18 an hour for that 1.5 hours that he worked overtime. So now we multiply 18 times 1.5. And 5 times 8 is 40. Carry the 4. 5 times 1 is 5, plus 4 is 9. 0 placeholder. 1 times 8 is 8. 1 times 1 is 1. We add those together. 17, carry the 1. 1 number behind the decimal, 1 number behind the decimal. So that means he made $27 in overtime. So his total amount that he made that day would be the sum of the amount of money he made for his regular shift and the amount he made for overtime. So we need to add $96 and $27. 7 plus 6 is 13. Carry the 1. 9, 10, 11, 12. So that means he made $123 that day. Raphael has a business selling computers. He buys computers from the manufacturer for $450 each and sells them for $800. Each month he must also pay fixed costs of $3,000 for rent and utilities at his store. If he sells N computers in a month, which of the following equations can be used to calculate his profit? Profit. Profit is found by subtracting the money you spend from the money you earn. So we know that he earns $800 for each computer that he sells. That's money he earns, $800 for each computer, which means to multiply times the number of computers he sells. And that's all the money he makes, so everything else is money he spends. So from the money he earns, we need to subtract $450 for each computer, because that's how much he has to pay the manufacturer. So minus 450 in. And we also have to subtract $3,000 flat. So just $3,000. Now if we compare what we have to these equations, we know we can already eliminate A. It doesn't even take the $3,000 into account, so A is out. On B, if we distributed this in, we'd be subtracting $3,000 in, which is not right. We're not losing $3,000 for every computer we sell, so B is out. On C, it has us multiplying 3,000 times in, which would be great. He'd be making tons of money, but that's not this situation. In D, when we distribute the N, the number of computers, N times 800, 800 N, minus N times 450, so minus 450 N, and then minus 3,000. So D's looking pretty good. The problem with E is, instead of subtracting the $3,000 he spends on rent and utilities, they're adding it back in like that's more money he's making. But he's not making that money, he's losing that money. So D would be the correct answer choice. Chan receives a bonus from his job. He pays 30% in taxes, gives 30% to charity, and uses another 25% to pay off an old debt. He has $600 remaining from his bonus. What was the total amount of Chan's bonus? First, I want to start with totaling the percentage that he spent or used, the percentage that is not left. So he pays 30% in taxes, gives 30% to charity, and uses the 25% to pay off an old debt. So that's a total of 85% that he has used, which means he had 15% left. And the $600 is the 15% of his total. $600 is 15% of the total amount of his bonus. 600 is equals, change the percent to a decimal, of means to multiply, and we don't know the total, so use a variable, like t. And now we just need to solve for t. So divide both sides by 1500ths. So 600 divided by 1500ths. We need to move the decimal 2 places to the right, so we do the same to 600, add 2 zeros, and 15 goes into 60 4 times. 15 times 4 is 60. You subtract and get 0. When you bring down 0, 15 goes into 0 0 times, and that's just going to keep happening 2 more times until we get 4,000. So what was the total amount of Chan's bonus? $4,000. Which of the following expressions is equivalent to x cubed times x to the 5th? First of all, we need to recognize that when you have 2 letters or a number in a letter next to each other with no operation symbols in between them, meaning there's no addition sign, subtraction, division, it is always understood that without any of those other operation signs, that we are multiplying these together. So this is x cubed times x to the 5th. And an exponent simply tells you how many times to multiply the base times itself. So x cubed means we're multiplying x times itself 3 times. And then we're multiplying that times x to the 5th, which is x times itself 5 times. So really, we're multiplying x times itself a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times. So x cubed times x to the 5th is the same as x to the 8th. Now there is a rule for this so that you don't have to go through this step every time. And the rule is when you multiply with the same bases, the base being, like in this case, x, then you simply add the exponents together. So 3 plus 5 is 8, so it's x to the 8th, which is answer choice D. Which of the following is a solution to the inequality 4x minus 12 is less than 4? First, we should solve for x in this inequality. So we're going to add 12 to both sides, bring down our 4x, minus 12 plus 12 is 0, so that cancels. Bring down our less than sign, and 4 plus 12 is 16. Then we need to divide both sides by 4. 4 divided by 4 is 1, times x is x, is less than 16 divided by 4 is 4. Keep in mind when solving inequalities that if you multiply or divide both sides by a negative number, you must flip the inequality symbol. In this case, we didn't have to, since we didn't divide both sides by a negative number. It's all about that negative. So now we can apply these answer choices. We want to find which one of these numbers is less than 4. Is 7 less than 4? No. Is 6 less than 4? No. Is 5 less than 4? No. What about 4? Is 4 less than 4? No. If this were a less than or equal to sign, if it said x is less than or equal to 4, then yes, 4 would be a solution because 4 is equal to 4. And it only has to be one, either less than or equal to. But in this case, it's not a less than or equal to sign. It's simply a less than sign, meaning that this number must be smaller than 4. So our answer is E. 3 is less than 4, or 3 is a smaller number than 4. Which of the following could be a graph of the function y equals 1 divided by x? Let's start with B. This is a linear function. In fact, it even looks like the parent function of a linear function, which is y equals x. So not y equals 1 divided by x. By the way, this is called a rational function. The root ratio means a comparison of two numbers or a fraction. And B is not the graph of a rational function. It's the graph of a linear function. C is a quadratic function graph. This parabola is graphed from a quadratic function. And this also looks like the parent form. The parent form of a quadratic function is y equals x squared. So this would also not be the graph of a rational function. On D, this is what an exponential function looks like. It starts out increasing slowly, but then it begins increasing faster. And that parent function is y equals a number to the x value, or b to the x. That's not the parent function, that's just the form. And it's actually y equals a times b to the x. But again, not a rational function. And then, so we can eliminate D. And then on E, this is very similar to B. It's another linear function. It graphs a line. And it's not the parent function this time, but it's still a linear function. So it's in this form, y equals mx plus b. So still, with a linear function, our x is not in the denominator like our rational function. So that one's out as well. Which means we're left with A, which is the graph of a rational function. Something you can think about with rational functions is that the only number you can't divide by is 0. Notice how on this graph, your domain is never 0. On this side of our graph, it's approaching 0 and then it turns down sharply away from 0 because your x value can never be 0 since you cannot divide by 0. It's the same thing in the first quadrant. Again, it's approaching 0 and then it turns sharply away from 0 because x can never be 0. Your y value will also never be 0. So again, you can tell in this graph our y value never reaches 0. However, in all of these other graphs, we do have an x value of 0. There it is, right there. Right there, our x value of 0. And so that's another way to tell that A is the solution. A is the graph of the function y equals 1 divided by x.